Look, it's like a high school reunion.
Woo, the band's back together.
Getting the band back together. For several years, Pat Brady and Eric Adelstein join me on the radio to talk politics every week. I can't guarantee you they'll show up every week, but I can tell you they're here today. Mr. Brady, how are you?
Morning, Steve. How you doing? Good to see Eric again.
And Andrea Darlis as well. You're not interested in saying hi to her? Or what's the story?
Oh, we already said our highs.
Okay. What about Nick Gale? You don't care about Nick Gale?
I do. Okay. Tom's, the rest of them are good.
Everybody.
Yeah, okay.
The rest of them are good.
And Eric Adelstein voted most likely to get into anything but politics. Now, Eric Adelstein, one of the most important voices in Chicago politics for years.
Remember when he was a Crane's Who's Who?
He was a Crane's Who's Who.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, you'll always
40.
be a Who's Who.
I'm a Who's That.
All right, let me start in City Hall. This mayor, and Eric, you get the first lob at this. This mayor does himself no favors over and over again. Is there anybody on this comms team working with him on how to message?
Well, ironically, he hasn't had a comms team until about a month ago, which was head-scratching to a lot of people in certainly the media world and in the political world. Look, I think we all know it's an impossible job, but I don't think he's doing himself any favors. And perception becomes reality in this job, as we all know, and people want the sense that somebody's in charge.
Right.
And he does not give off a vibe of he has a plan, he has goals that he's pushing towards, he has a vision for what he wants to do. It all just seems very haphazard, and I think that gives people a lot of pause.
Now, there's always a lot of turnover when a new organization comes in, a new administration, rather. But Rich Guidas leaving, I thought that was a great promotion from Rich Guidas. Lifelong city worker, veteran, dedicated his life to public service. But now he's out. Christina Paciona-Zayas. It seems like there's a lot of turnover quickly. Normally you see this maybe halfway through, or almost, to the end of the term.
The other telling thing to me is nobody is leaving and saying, look, things are going great. It's just time for me to leave.
Yeah.
Right.
They're just leaving.
But let me say this, too. I like her very much. I mean, I think she's very intelligent. I think she's great for the job. So that being said, but there just seems to be a lot of turnover very quickly.
I think the turnover stories are always a little bit overblown because I think these are high-pressure jobs and people do leave, whether you're in the governor's office, in the White House, or in a mayor's office. I do think the bigger challenge isn't sort of who the staff is. It's sort of what direction is the principal leading in. And I just think if you sat down 100 Chicagoans and say, what do you think Mayor Johnson's trying to accomplish? I think you'd get 100 answers or none.
Mm-hmm. Pat, you agree with that?
Yeah, and you'd probably get the same answer from the city council. The big debates have been on Gaza, which doesn't really relate to Chicago, and on the flag burning stuff we saw last week. He hasn't had an agenda. We saw that right after he won. And give the guy credit. He's a talented public speaker and politician, but he had the same speech after he won that he had when he was running, which to me is like there's no agenda here. It's just I'm the soul of the city, which doesn't – it's a city. You got to get the potholes filled.
Well, and Rahm Emanuel, who I would argue was one of the most effective mayors here. And as I said to him at one point, Mr. Mayor, you're never going to be president because you're a pain in the ass. But he got things done. And, it wasn't a perfect run, obviously, with some glaring mistakes. But the city functioned at a level it hasn't functioned at since. Certainly Mayor Daley. We just passed the anniversary of carving up Meigs Field. There were X's in his run as well, the original Mayor Daley. None of these guys are perfect, but Rahm Emanuel at one point said to me, I was chief of staff, I was a United States congressman. There's no job harder than being mayor of Chicago.
Yeah. I mean, let me just put a plug in for Mayor Lightfoot. I know she's endured a lot of slings and arrows, but just take, for example, the COVID crisis. She was out there every day or every week. She had a vision for the city. She said what she didn't know. She said what she did know. And she got us through a real crisis with the help of a lot of really key staff, including public health, Arwady, and all that kind of stuff.
Great.
But in that moment, she was there in leadership. And city people, whether you hated her or liked her or loved her, you were like, well, at least there's a mayor standing there telling me what's going on when I have uncertainty. And I think in times that are challenging, in times that are anxiety producing, we look for leadership. And I think that's been lacking from the fifth floor.
Maria Pappas, Cook County Treasurer on this mayor.
He ain't ready for prime time. He ain't. He's just not ready for prime time. Him being mayor is like putting Pappas in charge of a nuclear power plant.
So
Bad idea.
yeah, it wouldn't be good. Pat, is this what it comes down to, not being ready for a job and then having a seemingly weak organization around him?
Yeah, I mean, but that was, and I was on the other side of this. That was what we were saying, that he's not ready for prime time. Anybody that's ever, and I'm not sorry to go after him, but everybody that knew him or anything of him on the county board knew that he was very light on policy, light on showing up to work, and light on experience. And it's revealing itself now that he's married. He's just not ready for prime time. And it's fine. Nobody really is. But it's not like he's trying to get ready for prime time or making the effort. Finally getting a good press person after a year. And that's 101 politics. So he clearly is not ready for prime time. And people right now are already lining up to run against him.
And Eric, you can answer this. You knew Mayor Lightfoot better than most of us. One of the things that I think she looks back on, or maybe will look back on at some point, is everything didn't have to be a fist fight. Right. And every time Brandon Johnson is questioned, it's how dare you? How would he not know that comes with the job?
Yeah, I mean, these jobs are, no one's really prepared, but what you learn is, does someone grow into it? And the best ones do, and the worst ones shrink. And look, like Pat said, I have a lot of respect for Mayor Johnson. I think he is a talented politician. He was extremely effective, obviously, in that campaign. But he has yet to show, and look, it's still early. It's been a year. It seems like 10, but it's been 1.
Well, the scary thing on that regard, we're going to be in the international spotlight for 6 weeks this summer. And if this could all go south in a hurry, which is as good as NASCAR was to watch everybody going around the cool city, as bad as it'll be if there's riots or homeless people roaming around getting in the way of things.
Well, I mean, how many busloads are coming up here in the summer from Texas? That's just, Abbott's going to flood the state and the city.
That's what happens, Eric. And it's good to see you again when you're a sanctuary city. Hey, I'm going to Chicago.
But you know what, though? But that's a good point.
Good to get you two back together.
There's so much divisiveness, and I'm a city resident for a long time, my whole life basically, until I went to Champaign and then came back. But the divisiveness on this council, I mean, just everything from the flag burning, from Gaza, from spot shotter. There's just so much divisiveness on this council.
Well, it's funny, when they were the last election cycle, I went and watched all the long form interviews that TTW does with the city council members. Yeah. And the ones that identified themselves as socialist, every one of them gave a different definition.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure even what they want.
But here's the other, we are in a new era, and it's a post sort of machine era. And I don't mean machine necessarily in the old Richard J sense. But when you had mayors that were there for 20 years, the truth is the charter of the city of Chicago, it's a strong city council.
Strong city, it's very weak mayor.
But a weak mayor. Yeah. And our sort of lived experience is the opposite, because we've had these strong mayors.
We're supposed to have a deputy mayor too, right?
Right.
And they never did it.
That's right. Yeah. So now you're seeing really how the thing is structured to work. Now we can change the charter as citizens of the city of Chicago, but this is what happens when you don't have that sort of strong leader at the top. Some would say it's democracy. Some would say thank you, but no thank you.
Yeah.
Well, it's not working now, and somebody needs to take credit for it's not working and make your halftime adjustments, even though we're not quite at halftime. Rich Gaitis and his new chief of staff, weren't they co-deputy mayors? Wasn't that the original position?
He was chief of staff, and she was deputy chief of staff.
Oh, okay, so he's never deputy mayor.
No,
what about Michael J. Fox? Is he available? Because he did in Spin City, I thought, as a deputy mayor, I thought he was really strong.
I don't know. What about some of the West Wing guys? They're getting up there, but they're around.
Wouldn't Eric on West Wing? Wouldn't he be the perfect West Winger?
He's already got. There's already an actor in the family. He doesn't need another one.
Yeah. That was more like Scandal than
more in the city, the county, the state, and D.C. coming up. Eric Adelstein, Pat Brady, as we continue talking politics here. Certainly, what Pat brought up is a relevant discussion with the city in this summer ahead in Milwaukee. Just up the road, and the pressure that's on the police department. So we have a new potential state's attorney. It's, I believe, for obvious reasons, that Eileen O'Neill Burke will win that race. She has to make sure she repairs the Kim Fox damage, and that the courts and the judges and the police can all work together. Right. In rebuilding this mayor's office, if in fact he cares to do it, he's got to do something about his relationship with the police. Either one of you want to grab that?
Well, they always typically have a strained relationship, but it got too far strained. And with the state's attorney, there's a natural antagonism between the police and the prosecutors, because you've got a 28-year-old prosecutor approving felony cases, and the police don't like that. But that's a healthy thing. but it's gotten so bad that it needs to be repaired, and there needs to be more mutual respect. I don't know how you run a city when you don't effectively work with the people that protect the citizens.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's as Pat says, it's an inherent there's inherent conflict built in, but that's the job of the mayor, and you have to both be supportive of the police and supportive of the citizenry. And so it becomes even more difficult when you live in an age where that trust is broken down, right? But you represent both those constituencies, and bridging that divide is what successful leaders do, and it's part of the job of mayor. How that leads into this summer, I mean, I think you're right. The stakes are going to be enormous, not just for the city of Chicago, but for the Democratic Party, for President Biden, for the DNC. I mean, the stakes couldn't be higher.
Poorly that will play for him if they're right. So the narrative that they already are trying to push that the liberal cities are out of control.
Well, sure, the pictures make themselves, right? And you know, as much as you run around the country, I'm sure we all experience this, and you say you're from Chicago and people gasp and you say, don't believe everything you see on Fox News or wherever, you know, you might be getting your information. But those images make themselves, and a guy like Trump exacerbates it, fine. But, you know, the stakes are really, really high for the city.
I think the city has to put on a united front host. I mean, obviously, it's Democratic city, Democratic mayor, et cetera, et cetera. But I think they have to put on a good front hosting the DNC. And I don't know if an alderman, you know, hosting a rally where there's flag burning and he's at the forefront, and that seems to become the focus of many meetings, is a good look right now.
Well, you guys remember, I mean, dating ourselves a little bit, but 96 was the first time Democrats came back to Chicago after 1968.
Yep.
And I remember Mayor Daley, Mayor Richard M. was mayor, and I remember Bill Daley, and they were so hypersensitive. Obviously, it happened on their father's watch. Obviously, the stakes were enormous. But the lengths they went to sort of fix up the city, to build up the west side, the planters that went in, the planning that went in
on Madison.
But they were on pins and needles that this wasn't some sort of repeat of 68, and this is 1996.
Right.
I had the best T-shirt a Chicago detective gave me. It was a Chicago PD emblem. It said 1968, 1996, we kicked your father's butt, we'll kick yours too.
There you go.
Oh my God.
There you go.
Oh my God.
That's
They're already doing DNC training. I mean, there's everything going on, you know, the police department and whatnot. But I think what the mayor did right is pick Larry Snelling for to be superintendent.
There's got to be national. They got to be federal
so
troops in here too. Not troops, but federal agencies in here. I would think this is in Milwaukee too.
I think the other person we're not mentioning obviously is the governor.
Right.
And Governor Pritzker's had a huge role in bringing the DNC thing. Has a huge at stake for his own ambitions, and so I draw some comfort from the governor and the governor's group being involved in the planning and whatnot.
No
now,
question about it. I think what it comes down to, though, is right now we have tons of cops that listen to the show. And the families that say goodbye to their cop every morning as they go to work. These are the people that are going to be under the most emotional pressure, because we're asking people to protect not just elected officials and dignitaries and reporters. We're asking people to protect the city and the greater image of the city. And I think the mayor has to step up about that and to talk about how important that piece of it is and how much he appreciates that piece. I think that sort of respect would go a long way, and we haven't seen it yet.
No, but you know, the flip side of all that, if we do pull this off the right way, like the NASCAR thing I mentioned before, and we all live here, right? When people say the same thing to me when I go somewhere, oh, Chicago, this is the greatest city in the world,
Yeah,
I think.
it is.
Yeah, and if anybody should have been shot by now, it'd be me. But, you know, roaming around.
For cause.
For cause.
Right.
But,
God forbid,
point
is my mom
maybe
says.
this is a good way to showcase, hey, there's a lot going on.
No court would convict if you were winged. I don't want you to get hurt badly, but just grazed.
But there is a lot going on that we should, as a city, be proud of. I wish they had a PR department to emphasize the greatness. So we never hear that anymore.
I'm glad you brought NASCAR up. That was fantastic to watch. You know, not just because we were down there, but watching on TV with the skyline.
Well, my friends are calling me like, I didn't know
beautiful.
there was a lake by Chicago. I'm like, oh my God.
I know. You're right. We do need a better PR team for the city because it is the greatest city.
And let's go back to the county for a second. How do you each feel about the potential of Judge Burke?
I think she'll be good. Again, a really thankless job, a really difficult one. I think both of them were really good people. I didn't work on either of them, but I found the campaign to be kind of sleepy. Not a lot going on. I think in some ways I was relieved that I know the bar has been so lowered in our politics in this country today, but the fact that Clayton called her and congratulated her, the fact that she said he ran a good race, the fact that he's not standing up saying fraud and we can't believe the outcome, and like democracy only works if we accept it when we lose. And so I think he's been very gracious in terms of the job.
I think so too.
I think the job she will do. I think some of the good that Fox did, she'll pursue. Some of the bad that Fox did, hopefully she will repeal and do it in a different way. And I think will restore a bit of credibility to law enforcement in this town, which I think has been lacking. Whether that's fair or unfair, that's the reality. And so I'm optimistic that Judge Burke will be a good state's attorney.
Yeah. Agreed.
Agreed on Burke?
I totally agree. And I agree on the campaign. Clayton's a very nice man. He was completely classy. And her victory speech was equally classy. They just
very much.
To me, it was amazing that it was so low under the radar type of campaign, given the importance of that office. But, as an alum of that office, I'm glad to see her there. There are 250 prosecutors down. They need to change the focus away from a political agenda back to being the representative of the people on both sides of it, the defendants and the victims. I think people forget that job is not on the one side to put people in jail or on the other side to make sure all you're doing is protecting victims. Your job is to dispense justice fairly and dispassionately. And it got too political in the sense that there was an agenda there to, empty the prisons, not prosecute a lot of offenders, and just a left-wing agenda that just doesn't work in a big city. It doesn't, even in San Francisco, where they tried the same kind of progressive agenda, they voted it out. So it's time to get back to restoring that office to what it's intended to be, which is a representative of the people in the justice system.
Fixing prison reform and crime and punishment are parallel lines. They're not the same line. And in a civilized society, you have to have crime and punishment, and it doesn't matter what color you are. You're a criminal or you're not. You face the justice system fairly and you deal with it. That's another thing that's got to be right. Stand by for my sermon on turnout. Before we get to that, we go to Washington and see what Orange Julius Caesar is up to, along with the most ineffective Congress in American history. Certainly right up there. It's in a team picture. And should they be doing anything at all? Pat Brady's here, lifetime Republican, an actual Republican, as opposed to what some people use for the definition now. Eric Adelstein's here. He is one of the most influential Democrat voices anywhere, and he's on the Witness Protection Program, so you never notice him. He's not going, hey, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me. It's probably why he's good at his job. President Biden seems to be stepping in it quite regularly, either when he can grab this with corporate America. Does he need corporate America to win?
Well, he needs a coalition. I think he needs certainly the financial support to win, and it looks like he's got it compared to, the guy that pays his legal bills with all the fundraising. So, I think he needs part of corporate America, but I think also in this sort of polarized moment, a lot of people feel like corporate America has some blame to play for their feeling economically insecure, even though the numbers are better and things are better. But some of these stories that have come out on the grocery chains that have driven up the prices, and that it's not a function of inflation, it's a function of kind of greed.
Sure.
So I think we can disagree without being disagreeable. I think he's actually strikes a pretty good balance between not alienating corporate America, but trying to hold them to account.
Mm-hmm.
The grocery thing is huge. I've said for months, if you had either candidate just say, I'm going to stay in a grocery store and I'm going to stay here till your prices go down, and this is all I'm going to talk about, you would hit a dead center bullseye with America, because America has two economies, as Wall Street's economy and real people economy. Wall Street is backing Trump because they feel they'll make money with Trump if he's reelected. They're not concerned about 91 indictments. But, Pat, are you seeing or hearing behind the scenes, because you talk to everybody, a lack of money on the Trump side because Biden's out fundraised him by an exponential amount?
Yeah, but I'm not sure if it's a problem.
In what regard?
And maybe Eric has an answer to this. You watch this closely. So I watch these Trump rallies, and I watch them. And it's an hour and a half of complete idiocy. There's not one policy statement. Most of it's a lie. It's just ridiculous. But the people in the audience and the people that support him love it for whatever reason. Now, the flip side of that, and this is the thing that I haven't quite understood on the Democrat side, it doesn't seem that the Biden campaign has been able to tap into anything. It's like they're running, and this is a bad term for him because I don't think he is, but kind of almost like a Hillary Clinton elitist type of campaign versus the man of the people type campaign that we normally see from Democrats. Trump's is sheer idiocy, what he says, but his people love it. But I don't see that with Biden saying we're going to go into the grocery store and rip it down or something.
You know, it's funny you say that. I hadn't watched a full Trump speech because
get a glass of bottle of wine.
I like to not like throw up a little bit in my mouth. But I watched him in after one of those primaries, like 25 minutes, and it was just lunacy. And he made no sense. But you know what really troubled me? I just have to say this, Steve. I was watching it on CNN. Am I allowed to say it? Can I say that on this?
What show do you think you're on? Yeah.
And I won't watch it again. I will be watching ABC News. And let me tell you why. Because they came back to the desk and they so normalized, like, because he lied about everything. And they just said, well, that's just Trump. And I was like, that's not okay. Like, you can't just say.
That's the lowering the standard of the office to a level that it can't be lowered to.
Right. And
we talked about this in our previous life. If they would have ignored him from the beginning, like these gag orders on the New York case, he does that on purpose. He goes after the family.
Let me ask you about that. I know you're going somewhere else, but let me ask you about that.
No, go on this thing.
In the interest of time, with the gag orders, at what point, whether it's strategic or not, at what point is he held to account for violating gag orders? At what point does a judge say, okay, you're going to sit in jail tonight? I know he's an ex-president, but he doesn't care. He just says what he says, and the judges keep moving the line. Okay, now don't say it. Okay, now don't say it.
Because they're never going to enforce it. I have never seen anybody get thrown in jail.
Well, then why do the laws matter?
Well, that's the point. But the reality is, thinking it from a political perspective, every time he does that, we spent yesterday talking about they're violating his First Amendment rights. Now, I know differently because I know what the law is, but most people that support him think that they're taking away his First Amendment rights.
Well, he's a lot of awful things. The one thing he's good at is being able to play the victim and say, you think they're coming after me? They're coming after you.
Exactly.
And he's turned all of his crimes and corruption and awfulness to say, this is why they're coming after you. And
if they threw him in jail, he'd raise $4 million.
I mean, that's the frustrating part of this phenomenon.
Well, but you're not going to change folks that have believed in him every single day. The key is the middle. The middle's going to elect the next president one way or the other. Biden's campaign appears confused on good days. Trump's campaign appears to be dedicated to trying to keep him between whatever lines he might be between. But you look at the polls, and I know the polls are early, and they were way wrong in 16, and they were wrong to a large extent in 20. But the Wall Street Journal reporting just overnight last night, Trump leads Biden in 6 out of 7 swing states.
Yeah, but they're all on the margin except one.
But to me, that is too close.
It's going to be close, Steve. It's going to be really close.
But that's the part that's just fascinating to me.
Yeah. Did you hear what Nebraska might do?
No.
So Nebraska votes by congressional district. They have 5 congressional districts. So normally 4 go to Republicans, and the Omaha district goes to a Democrat. They might switch it and make winner take all.
Which would help Trump.
It helps Trump. It gives Trump the race under the current analysis of this being the 3 states. But Maine could do the same thing.
Yeah, Maine could do the same thing. Although Governor Mills, I'm not sure she would do it, but she could.
Yeah.
Where is each candidate losing voters? Is Biden losing it with
every
the
time they open their mouths?
No, because is Biden losing voters with the mishandling of the migrant crisis? Is Trump losing female voters because of Roe v. Wade? I mean, where is each candidate losing voters?
Well, it's hard to say because we have 2 data points. We have polls and we have the primaries, and neither of them necessarily reflects what's going to happen in November. I think if you looked at polls, you would say, Biden's losing part of his coalition over what's going on in the Middle East and some of this stuff. But then you look at these primaries, and he's outperforming Trump by 20 points in non-contested race. He's getting 90%, 85%. And you'd say, well, that's not really a challenge for him. I think Trump, you've seen it in these midterm elections and these special elections. I think women who put him over the top in 2016 and then swung back to Biden on abortion in the suburbs are really going to be the key. I think the other key, Steve, that's going to determine this election are what pollsters are calling the neither group. The folks that don't like either.
Right.
So
Anybody
but not for third party. Like, because the question becomes, people who say I don't like Trump or Biden, they swung huge for Biden in 2020. Will they now vote for an RFK? Will they sit out? Will they vote for a Jill Stein? How do those voters break? And I think that will be the key to this election.
In a close race like this, you don't need 19% that Ross Perot got in 92 to be a problem. I don't know why the Democrats are screaming about RFK Jr. I think he's his own worst enemy. And the idea that he's automatically going to suck votes from Biden. We don't know if he's going to take votes from Biden or Trump.
We don't.
I watched him last night on Cuomo, and he's a hardcore conspiracy theorist. Hardcore. He denies it now, but I was thinking, these seem to me to be more Trump voters than Biden voters.
I think he draws a lot.
It's never good when your own family says anybody but him.
Right.
Which is what the Kennedy family
is
is
unusual?
to say. No, not well. Your family, is not.
That's why you're not running for office.
Right. For Christmas this year.
True. At 7:45, I believe something that I believe you two don't believe. We'll find out when we get back, Andrea. I believe that the vice presidency will make a huge difference.
I agree.
In this race on both sides, because both these guys are really old and in questionable health. So stand by, because I'm pretty sure you guys think that's wrong. We'll come back, and I know how much the audience enjoys when I'm wrong. So stick around for that. Eric Adelstein's here. Pat Brady's here. Andrea's here. Nick's here. You're here. We appreciate that. Regardless of how this election goes, historians are going to look back, in my opinion, and go, what were the Biden folks doing with Kamala Harris? Because when a guy gets elected at 77 years old, in my view, she should have been over his right shoulder the entire time. She should have been proven to be ready to take the job. Now she's taken on all sorts of issues, and she's been doing fine in the last several months. But it feels a little late for her to get this done. And then on the flip side, Trump will not pick a strong vice presidential candidate because he won't have anybody else get a moment of spotlight. So how is America supposed to believe that if something happens to either one of these guys, the next person up's ready for the job?
That's a rhetorical question, right? Was that an actual question?
That's a factual question.
I was taking notes. I got lost.
Yeah, I was thinking about that.
And by the way, you have to say object first. I object.
You're right.
Yeah.
Leading the witness.
So who does Trump pick? The woman getting her teeth whitened in South Dakota, North Dakota?
Yeah, she's hardcore pro-life, hardcore pro-life.
But talk about the effect on the. I'm telling you, I firmly believe independents are going to look at this race and go, well, the second person matters more than they ever have.
Yeah, it logically it would make sense. It just never seems to come out that way. Nobody ever votes based on the vice president. They just don't. Maybe you'll be right this time, Steve, but I just don't see it. People don't make those kinds of calculations.
Or if I'm right that Trump picked somebody weak, does that somehow negate the two choices anyway? And you're right back to where we started.
Well, do you really think Trump's going to pick someone that everyone's going to be like, oh, yeah, they'd be great if Trump wasn't here? Come on. Like, that's just never going to – and there's no world that happens. Because like you said, his ego is so fragile, he can't have someone that's decent that could overshadow
better
him.
than him.
Right.
I agree. The only time that it's made a difference,
I just never see you silent for more than a second.
I'm still taking notes on that question.
Okay.
But when Quayle was picked, everyone said this is going to kill Bush.
Well, but it worked for two. It's like Palin. I was just going to say Palin.
But Palin didn't cost McCain the election.
He would have lost it, but he cost him a lot of women.
It did.
Yeah.
It did.
Well, the reality is, so the convention, McCain, at the convention, we did a big event for him. He was ahead by 5 after the convention. And then Sarah Palin said she never read a news or couldn't cite a newspaper she'd read. But Quayle gave a good convention speech, too, in 92, and they liked the youth. And then when he couldn't spell potato, that was into that one.
More on the vice presidential spelling bee later.
The downfall of political candidates is just mind-boggling.
Congress isn't doing anything. Not doing anything. And I know some people feel when Congress doesn't get anything done, it's fine. Every single elected member of the House and Senate costs American taxpayers somewhere between $4 and $10 million a year. Because of that, shouldn't we expect more? Andrea?
Yeah, no, I agree. I was going to, when I talk Mike Johnson, the ineffectiveness of being able to pass some sort of a border deal. Maybe we should talk about the border. because that's going to be a pivotal issue for a lot of voters come November when they're deciding who to vote for.
To me, that's a Congress issue. That's not a White House issue.
Why haven't we passed any sort of a border deal?
Well, the Senate did. The Senate passed a deal, and Republicans and Democrats, actual bipartisanship, the way the thing...
Yeah.
And a great deal for if you're a conservative, it was a good deal.
Yes,
I mean,
it was.
you could argue Democrats caved on every issue that they cared about to get a deal done.
They did. They caved almost everything.
And this is sort of, you were joking about Pat being an OG Republican, but this is what's sort of the hollowing out of the Republican Party in Washington. I mean, they stand for nothing. This was a good deal, something that was a bunch of conservative principles.
They stand for Trump.
Right.
They stand for Trump.
Yeah.
It's a cult, not an ideological party anymore. And the Senate passes this thing, and it's basically dead on arrival in the House because Johnson's scared of his own shadow. They can't pass Ukraine aid, for this American ally. You've got a Republican nominee for president who bows down to a Russian dictator and so doesn't want them helping him. I mean, it's a tragedy. And to your point, Steve, years from now they'll look back on this and say, "What were we thinking?"
Right.
Well, and again, as a lifelong Republican, it's nowhere near the republicanism I grew up in. I mean, the Ukraine thing should have been a no-brainer for conservatives. That's what Reagan's whole message was peace through strength. Even in Israel, the delay on the money to Israel, all the things that they're doing are completely inconsistent with historic Republican positions, and it's all a loyalty to Trump. But I do see there is some blowback now on the 8. They primaried a guy in Virginia, the more moderate members. There are only 22 contested seats now in the whole Congress?
Yeah.
That are actual races where they're not decided in the primary.
Remember, that's why gerrymandering is bad, boys and girls, because the candidates pick you, you don't pick the candidates.
But the point is that if you really come out of a Trump rally or came out of a Republican rally, what do Republicans stand for anymore? And it's not what we used to stand for. That's why so many people like me just don't support the Trump agenda because it's not the conservative agenda. It's
a loyalty oath.
It's a loyalty oath, and he's not a conservative.
But
He's a big spending, draft dodging, adjudicated sexual predator that wants to lead this country for 4 more years, and it's a travesty, and it just can't happen.
But the Biden folks have a huge problem, and that is they have to prove that not only is he healthy enough to stay in office and do 4 more years, it's not just age. It's what does Biden stand for? What has he accomplished? It goes to the messaging, because I would argue that there's several things that he's gotten done that weren't done before that somehow the White House managed to bury.
Yeah.
And do the other job. So he's got to prove that he has an agenda. It can't just be Trump's dangerous, Trump's terrible. If you already have that opinion, you're not going to vote for Trump.
Well, I think there's got to be two sides to the coin. I think democracy is at risk. I think the January 6th stuff is still relevant. I think taking away rights and freedoms like abortion does matter. But elections are about the future. I do think Biden has great stuff to point to. I don't think they've done a great job of highlighting. I mean, 11 million new jobs, unemployment at the lowest level in 50 years, 17 states with unemployment below 3%. People aren't feeling it, partly because of the way the news is covered and partly the way the White House talks about it.
Well, that poll you cited from the Journal, 75 in the states, the swing states, 75% of the people in, I think, 4 of the 6 swing states say their economic position is great right now. So there's a huge disconnect. But the only thing is that I think is a loser unless they do something quickly. I've heard this for years. Well, it's like if they knew me, they'd like me.
Yeah,
I say that about Margot Robbie.
Right.
I mean, it's just they're not. They got to get going on it because they're behind right now.
Justin says, Texter, I was a big Trump supporter when he ran for office, but I'm too tired of the drama, and I'm tired of the drama between both parties. I'm not sure who I'm going to vote for. We got another texter here from the 775. Is that right? Well, it doesn't matter where they're from. Oh, 217. It'd be great if Pat Brady and Eric could be a weekly feature. Well, we're talking to other people.
My wife, you got my wife's text.
Yes, I did.
217.
Maybe that's my mom. Might be my mom.
All right, before we wrap this up, turnout, terrible.
Oh.
In this Democrat city that hasn't had a Republican mayor since the 30s, and in this Democrat state, we couldn't get more than 30% of the people to show up, and everybody said, oh, my God, we have to have a different mayor than Lori Lightfoot. And now we've got less than 25% coming out for a primary in a city where people are going, oh, my God, you got to do something about the crime. And you got 1 minute to answer this. Is it candidates people don't care about it? Is it apathy because people truly believe nothing can change? I mean, what is it?
It's apathy. It's disillusionment. It's negative ads. It's the whole shebang, and people feeling like nothing ever changes. And it doesn't matter, meet the new boss, same as the old boss. And that's a problem in our politics today.
The last word, Pat Brady.
I've never said this in the 8 years Eric and I have been doing this. I completely agree with Eric.
All right. Wait, what?
It's a minute after 8. Thank you. Thank you, Eric Adelstein. If your kid's running for 5th grade school president, call me. I'll hook you up with Eric. And in addition to that, Pat Brady, thanks for coming here.
Thanks, guys.